and Israel immediately backed down. Shamir was replaced by Shimon Peres, much more diplomatic, essentially carried out the same policies, but in a much more polite fashion, and that conflict was over. Well, something like that is happening right now, but the situation is different. First of all, Israel is a different country now, and especially in the last few years, it's moved very far to the ultranationalist and religious right, and it is behaving pretty irrationally. That's what happens when you get ultranationalist religious forces in charge. If God is on your side, it doesn't matter what you do. We know that from other places. And that's now a significant, non-trivial tendency in Israel. The other difference is that the United States is not what it was, for a number of reasons. One reason is that the United States now has armies in the field in various wars in the region. And you probably read General Petraeus' comment that, finally hearing, for those of you in Birzeit, a microphone just went on just in time. Petraeus, main general in the region, made a statement that was widely publicized, in which he said that Israeli intransigence is harming U.S. soldiers in the field. Well, he pretty soon withdrew the statement. He must have been under White House pressure to shut up, so he withdrew the statement. However, the same comments have been made by other people in high positions, high in the intelligence and the military, and is now a strain in U.S. thinking. Now, if that reaches the public, hasn't really reached the public yet, but if it reached the public, it could set off a huge wave of anti-Semitism in the United States. The idea that somebody's acting in a way to harm our brave boys defending us from terror, that's not going to sell. And there is a split of a kind in American planning between the traditional support, which has plenty of basis, and a new strain of concern about the effect for U.S. interests of this intransigent policy. Another change is that U.S. public opinion has been changing quite considerably. The virtually reflexive, unanimous support for anything that Israel did is eroding in the Jewish community too. What's happening, particularly since Gaza, is just too inconsistent with sort of standard values to be easily tolerated. And it's very easy to see the changes in public opinion. Now, they haven't affected policy, and they have not affected the media, so you don't see any indication of it in what you read. But the indications are pretty clearly there on the ground. Well, for the most part, public opinion is disregarded in policy on almost every issue, but not entirely. You can't dismiss it totally, and sooner or later it may have an impact. Well, those are changes, and I'll make my last final statement after two final statements. There is an analogy that is very worth thinking about. Many analogies are drawn between Israel and South Africa. Most of them, I think, are at least misleading, if not totally wrong. But there's one which is not discussed, which is significant. It goes back to the early 60s. By then, the early 1960s, white South Africa recognized that it's becoming very isolated in the world. South Africa was becoming a pariah state. And the South African foreign minister spoke to the American ambassador in South Africa about this. The reports have recently been released. He told the American ambassador, he said, look, we know everybody's voting against us in the United Nations, but you and I both know that there's only one vote in the United Nations. That's yours. And as long as you're backing us, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks. Well, that's pretty much predicts what happened. The United States kept backing them until the late 1980s. As late as 1988, Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress were designated by the Reagan administration as among the more notorious terrorist groups in the world. In fact, Mandela just got his permission. He was removed from the terrorist list last year, just to indicate how far this went. Now he can enter the United States without special permission. But up to 1988, the U.S. continued to back him. There was a strong sanctions movement, divestment, and congressional resolutions. It didn't matter. The U.S. kept backing them. And as late as the late 1980s, South Africa looked completely victorious. The opposition forces had been destroyed. They were doing anything they wanted in the world, attacking Angola, Mozambique, maintaining apartheid. It looked as if nothing was going to change. Well, the U.S. changed its policy. In 1990, roughly, the U.S. changed its policy. Mandela was let out of prison. There were moves towards some sort of change in internal policy. Within a few years, apartheid was gone. Well, it's not the only case, and that's the way the world works. And I think Israel today is rather similar in its internal, the way it's behaving internally to the way South Africa was during the period when the U.S. was continuing to back it. And I think there's a lesson there. They're treading on pretty dangerous turf. Actually, just keeping me from talking at Birzeit is a very minor example of this. From their point of view, it's a very irrational act. It doesn't matter much, but it's an irrational act. Humiliating the ambassador of Turkey was a much more irrational act. But things like this are happening. And it's a sign of opportunities for pressing for diplomatic settlement, not perfect, but at least reasonable in the short term, maybe a way towards something else. And I think these realities should not be overlooked.
Thank you very much, Professor Chomsky. It was a pleasant lecture to my taste. We can now take a few questions, I think, from the hall here in Birzeit. Please raise your hand. في حدا معه يلف المايك؟
Thank you for the...
If you would be brief and to the point, because we have only about 30 minutes left for the whole thing.
Okay, I have 2 points. The first one is just expressing a real appreciation for your analysis of the U.S.'s role in the region and in the world, and their interest and putting Israel's role in the context of that overall U.S. role and hegemony. And what came out is that Israel was a major pillar of U.S. strategy in the region. The second point is actually what I see is a break from this analysis, or a major divide or a major break, when you ultimately propose a two-state solution. I see this as keeping the issue within the narrow nationalist confines, notwithstanding that what is being proposed, okay, is much less than the minimum requirement to satisfy Palestinian nationalist rights. But the call for a one secular state, actually, and joint struggle, okay, to establish this state would undermine this U.S. hegemony in the region, while actually the two-state solution would consolidate the existing situation. Israel would continue to play its role, and the new Palestinian